And today I want to talk about something that isn't so much of a technical video. It's not like Ableton stuff. I'm not going to do a screen share. I basically want to talk about a topic that gets tossed around a lot, asked about on the internet, and I have some strong personal feelings on this one. Should you hire somebody to mix and master your music? And if so, what kind of goes into that? And the reason I wanted to talk about it is, I'm pretty active in my local scene. That's most of my mixing and mastering work, right? It's just for people I know through my community, which is great. And I've generally had really good experiences with that. But lately, as people have started to talk about, working with me a little bit more, it's brought in some new work, which is great. I'm happy to have it. But there's a specific problem that I've hit a couple times that I think is worth talking about. Because if you're asking this question yourself, like, oh, should I get a guy to take care of this? It's important to think about how you approach it and how you can get the most out of it and where you are in your journey as a producer or an artist or whatever it is you do. So let's start with this. There's basically 3 types of people that I've had come to me quite a bit, and they're all in a little bit of a different place. And I'd say 2 of these types I really like working with. There's one that tends to cause some problems, right? Again, if you have a different take on this or somebody else says something different, cool, definitely pay attention to that, but this has just been in my experience, right? So the first type is an artist or producer who's good at the composition side of things. They write cool melodies, they might sing, they play some instruments, they record, they do all that kind of stuff. But they don't really have a concept as far as how to mix something and turn their arrangement into a final product. These people tend to be pretty good because they approach hiring a mixer with the right attitude. They kind of come in and they know what they don't know. They come in and they're like, hey, I need help. It's almost done. I just need to get this over the finish line. And I know you know about this stuff, so let's partner up. That works out really well because they approach you as a partner in the thing. They want you to put your spin on it. They want to hear your creative input. They want to know why certain decisions were made. And they tend to be pretty good. The other group of people that tends to be pretty good are the ones who could probably do it themselves without any problem, right? They're as good or sometimes better than me, They just really know what they're doing and they're completely capable. They're just looking for a different perspective on things. So they want to just go outside of themselves a little bit and get somebody with a fresh set of ears and a fresh take and possibly a different way of hearing the track than they would hear it, right? So that's also great. The kind of troublesome category that I've run into a bunch of times in recent history, kind of with this new influx of inbounds, inquiries, is basically this. It's people who want to be able to mix their own stuff. They want to understand mastering. Not all the people who I'm talking about in this category are like this, but they come in with the wrong attitude. So basically the story that usually goes down is they write a track, they're like, okay, it's good, time to mix and master. And then they spin their wheels for 2-3 months sometimes, just trying to figure out how to get the sound that they look up to. They want it to sound like one of the records they really love, but they just can't get there because they're not there yet, right? And there's nothing wrong with that. I've been there. I was there once, right? That's why I learned how to do it. But they're there, right? And some of those people come in with the right attitude. Like I said, they come in and they're looking at it as a partnership, right? And they want to work together. Same thing as kind of like that first group of people who doesn't know anything. They come in and they want to work with you. The problems come about when they approach hiring somebody for mixing as just a nerd for hire, essentially. They do all this stuff, they try to get it right, they throw up their hands out of frustration, and then they say, well, let's just throw some money at the problem. That'll fix it. That always works, right? So then basically they come in and they start to micromanage immediately. I'll do a rough mix. They're saying, oh, well, do this. Turn that up again. And I'm like, well, I turned that down for a reason. They're like, no, that needs to be louder. Oh, okay, sure. And I get it. Revisions are part of the process. I don't always nail it right on the nose in the first go. So I'll say, sure, let's turn that back up again. Why not? But then the requests get more numerous. It's do this to the reverb and turn the bass up and more distortion on that. And this isn't loud enough. And let's do this, right? And what starts to happen is it gets into this weird thing where they're kind of turning the knobs, but through my text messages, right? So like I'll bounce out a mix, send it to him, say, hey, check this out, let me know what you think. And then I start to get messages with more revisions, and like I said, this has happened not a lot, but enough times where I felt like I had to say something. So at this point, they're not really looking at me as a collaborator. They're just, like I said, nerd for hire. Do what I say. You work for me, I'm paying you. That seems to kind of be the attitude that I'm catching from certain people sometimes. So this isn't great because, like in one case, somebody said, hey, this sounds too much like my rough mix. Why am I paying you? And I'm like, well, the reason it sounds like your rough mix is because, like I said, you're basically mixing through me, right? So I'm not really putting any of my expertise or experience to work, which is really what you're paying for when you hire somebody for this kind of thing. They're not really taking advantage of any of that. They're just kind of like ordering me around and using my plugins. That's like essentially what's happening. So if you're thinking about hiring somebody for mixing, if you know what you're doing, I probably don't need to tell you this, right? If you don't know what you're doing and you know that you don't know what you're doing, then you're probably gonna be comfortable just passing it off to me. If you're in that middle category, I'd recommend a couple things. Number one, whatever you do, just approach it with some humility. You're coming to somebody else, to me or whoever you go to, you're going to this outside party for help. So you have to be open to receiving help. Like for a good example is I was doing a mix and there was like a pad that was just taking up so much space and it was just dominating all the vocals and all these harmonies and stuff that were supposed to be happening. And I said, oh, it's a pad. This is kind of like a bed that stuff sits on. So I pushed it way down in the mix. The artist was really in love with this pad sound. And they were like, well, why'd you make it so quiet? And I'm like, because it needs to support the kind of the main event of what's happening musically. That's not the main event. That's just, like I said, it's a pad. It's padding what's happening, right? It kind of tells you what it is. Yeah, but then they were just immediately like ordering me to...
No, you gotta bring that way up. That's not nearly loud enough, right?
Then things got muddy and they're like, well, why is the vocal sound so quiet now? And I said, I didn't change the vocal, I just made the pad louder and now it's masking things. So, and then, they shoot back, we'll
make the vocal louder.
I can't do that, right? Because eventually we get into this loudness contest until the whole thing's just clipping. So that's like a good example of somebody who wasn't really open to receiving guidance or help that I was trying to offer. Because this is kind of the next point. At the end of the day, I am on your team. I want this stuff to sound just as good as you want it to sound. Like at the end of the day, if I put out an iffy mix, that doesn't really help anybody. You have an iffy mix and I have something that I don't want to put in my portfolio because I'm embarrassed about the quality. It's in everybody's interest to have this stuff sound nice. The other thing, and this is a little tough love, your arrangement might suck. I'm sorry. To do a good mix, it's totally dependent on having a good arrangement. You can't really fix a bad arrangement. You can kind of fix a bad arrangement with mixing, but it has its limits. So like, for example, a good arrangement is kind of boring to mix, like in the sense that you don't really do anything that's sophisticated. If it's a good arrangement, I just go in and I'm like, okay, a little compression, EQ, position things, do my leveling work, some automation, whatever, some bus effects to help glue it together. But a good arrangement, not that it mixes itself, but when everything has its own space, you're just trying to enhance what's happening. You don't have to really like force anything into place. Whereas if you have something that's fighting itself, an arrangement that's not laid out well, that's when you get to the more sophisticated mixing techniques that feels like you're really doing some shit. Like when you go on YouTube, right, and you see all this fancy stuff about like, oh, well, it's like a 3-step side chain into a dynamic EQ, and then it throws it into a reverb to separate. Whenever you get into that super fancy pants stuff, that's usually to correct some kind of problem, right? That's usually because something isn't working and all the usual like go-to things in the toolbox aren't getting it. You try to carve out with EQ, you do some volume automation, and you're like, this still isn't really clicking. So that's just one thing you have to accept. Like if I come back and I make suggestions about your arrangement, and then you come at me and say like,
well, this is my music and I'm paying you to mix it, so you better get your stuff together, mister.
True story, by the way. That's not really the right attitude to have. I'm not saying that you suck if I'm critiquing your arrangement. I'm saying, hey, I think I get what you're trying to do. I'm just trying to shape it better so we can turn this into a finished a finished thing that is the strongest version of what you were initially hearing. So don't take it as like an ego thing. If I make a suggestion about like, oh, well, maybe if we mute this part for a little bit, or, oh, this needs to come down and this part needs to be on top. All that stuff is there to help you. It's not me trying to attack your work or something. So anyway, that's just a couple suggestions I would make when you're approaching this, and some things that you should look at in yourself when you come to this crossroads of like, hey, should I get a guy to mix this? Should I do it myself? If I am gonna get somebody to do it, how should I approach it? So anyway, let me know how I did. If you go into the description of this video, there's 2 Spotify playlists I'm gonna link to. One is all of my music that I have mixed and mastered. There's another playlist of music that I've mixed and mastered that's only from other people. So you can hear kind of what I would do with both, what my perspective is, and how I like to position things as a mixer and stuff. And of course, if you have opinions on this, which this is a little bit of a spicier topic than I usually do, please leave me a comment. I would love to hear what you think. And oh yeah, don't forget to like and subscribe. That shit really helps. Thank you.